For decades, most people who loved Fleetwood Mac believed Christine McVie's death was a quiet, gentle passing after a short illness. 3 words that gave the world just enough to grieve without asking further questions. That was the story her family shared on November 30th, 2022, and out of respect for their privacy, almost no one pushed for more. But months later, a very different account surfaced, one buried inside legal paperwork rather than a press release, and it revealed that her final days involved far more than the public had ever been told. The shift happened in early April 2023 when the entertainment outlet The Blast obtained Christine McVie's official death certificate as part of the filings used to settle her estate. What the document showed did not match the soft, simple explanation everyone had accepted. According to that certificate, McVie's death resulted from an ischemic stroke, a stroke caused when blood flow to part of the brain is blocked or severely reduced, starving brain tissue of oxygen within minutes. It is one of the most common ways a stroke becomes fatal, and by itself, it would have been enough to explain her death. But the certificate did not stop there. Also listed were several additional and serious conditions. Bilateral renal infarction, meaning blood flow to both of her kidneys had been cut off, a large atrial thrombus, a sizable blood clot sitting inside one of the chambers of her heart, and atrial fibrillation, an irregular heartbeat well known for dramatically raising the risk of a fatal stroke. Taken together, this was not a single quiet illness closing in gently. It was a chain of medical failures, each one compounding the next, unfolding largely out of public view. Then there was the second cause of death recorded on the certificate, one that reads almost like a puzzle, metastatic malignancy of unknown primary origin. In plain terms, doctors had found cancer that had already spread through her body, but they could never determine where it had originally started. The disease had scattered itself into new locations, yet its point of origin remained undiscovered. Medical professionals refer to this as cancer of unknown primary, and it is considered one of the more difficult and unforgiving diagnoses in oncology. Various cancer organizations estimate that cases like this make up only a small fraction, generally in the range of 2 to 5% of all cancer diagnoses. Its danger lies not just in its rarity, but in how aggressively it can behave and how hard it is to treat effectively, since doctors often cannot target therapy toward a source they cannot locate. Christine had, in her own understated way, hinted that something wasn't right. In an interview she gave to Rolling Stone in the middle of 2022, several months before her death, she admitted she was in fairly poor health. She spoke about a chronic back condition, sometimes described as scoliosis, that had left her unable to stand and perform the way she once had. She used an old expression to sum up how she felt, that the spirit remained willing even though her body had grown weak. Most people who heard those words at the time assumed she was simply describing the ordinary toll of aging, with no idea of the deeper struggle unfolding beneath the surface. To understand why her death resonated so deeply with people who had never met her, it helps to go back to where her story began, long before the world knew the name McVie. She was born Christine and Perfect on July 12, 1943, in England's Lake District. Yes, Perfect really was her birth surname, and she later joked in interviews that she had lived up to the name right up until the day she got married. Her father, Cyril Perfect, worked as a concert violinist and music lecturer, and her grandfather had once played the organ at Westminster Abbey. Music ran deep in her family, but it was her mother, Beatrice, who added an unusual dimension to her upbringing. Beatrice worked as a psychic and faith healer, and Christine grew up believing there were forces in the world that couldn't be easily explained or measured. That sense of the unexplainable would resurface later in her life, in ways connected directly to her music. She began classical piano lessons at the age of 4, following a fairly traditional path that might have led her toward teaching music rather than performing it. Everything changed when she discovered a songbook of Fats Domino's boogie-woogie piano pieces left around the house by her older brother. The rolling, joyful rhythms pulled her away from the strict classical training she'd known and toward something rawer and more alive. She eventually enrolled in art college to study sculpture, but found herself drawn instead into England's blues scene during the 1960s. It was there that she joined a band called Chicken Shack as their keyboardist and vocalist, quickly earning attention for a voice that critics and audiences described as warm, weathered, and unusually emotionally direct. Her 1969 recording of I'd Rather Go Blind became a genuine hit, and the influential British music publication Melody Maker named her its best female vocalist for 2 consecutive years. Around the same period, she grew close to John McVie, the bassist of a rising blues outfit called Fleetwood Mac. The two married in 1968, with the band's guitarist at the time, Peter Green, serving as best man. For a while, Christine contributed to Fleetwood Mac's records without official membership or credit, even painting artwork for one of their album covers, while balancing her desire to be near her husband during his constant touring. Everything changed when Peter Green's mental health deteriorated and he left the band, leaving a significant creative gap. In 1970, the group formally invited Christine to join as a full member. Drummer Mick Fleetwood would later describe her as the connective force that held the band's volatile personalities together. The band's true turning point came at the end of 1974 when American musicians Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks joined the lineup. Christine and Stevie's voices blended together almost immediately, and the two women formed a bond built on mutual respect that would grow into one of music's most enduring friendships. As the band worked toward recording what would become their most celebrated album, Rumours, nearly every relationship within the group collapsed at once. Christine and John's marriage ended in divorce. Stevie and Lindsey's romantic relationship fell apart as well. Amid this personal chaos, the band recorded some of its most beloved material, channeling heartbreak directly into song. Remarkably, in the middle of her own divorce, Christine wrote some of the album's most optimistic and comforting songs, including Don't Stop, a track about looking toward better days ahead even as her own marriage was ending. She also wrote You Make Loving Fun, a song reportedly inspired by a relationship with the band's lighting director, while allowing her then-husband to believe it was written about their dog. Another song, Songbird, reportedly came to her in the middle of the night as a complete melody, which she said felt almost like being visited by something beyond herself, a moment that echoed the unexplainable world she'd grown up around as a child. Mick Fleetwood has said publicly that he wants the song played at his own funeral one day. Fleetwood Mac's success during this era was staggering. Rumours has sold tens of millions of copies worldwide, and the band's total sales run well past 100 million records. With that level of fame came intense pressure, and Christine later spoke candidly in interviews, including one with The Guardian, about her heavy use of drugs and alcohol during those years, admitting she once believed it helped her performances before eventually recognizing how dangerous the lifestyle had become. She described one particularly frightening stretch of staying awake for days on end, fueled by substance use, until fear for her own heart convinced her to walk away from that lifestyle for good. Her personal life during this period also included a passionate relationship with Beach Boys member Dennis Wilson, who died by drowning at age 39 only a few years after their relationship ended. Beneath the surface of her success, Christine also struggled quietly with chronic back pain, stage fright, and the exhaustion of constant touring, despite privately preferring a simple rural lifestyle. By the late 1990s, she had developed a severe fear of flying that made the demands of touring unbearable. In 1998, shortly after the band's induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, she left Fleetwood Mac entirely and moved into a historic manor house in Kent, largely withdrawing from public life for the next several years. She would remain away from the band for 16 years, during which she gardened, renovated her home, and lived the quiet country life she had always wanted, even as she missed performing and her friendships within the band, especially with Stevie Nicks. Her fear of flying was eventually addressed with help from a therapist who encouraged her to book a flight to Hawaii to visit Mick Fleetwood. She later described the experience of that flight as liberating, and it marked the turning point that allowed her to return to music. In 2014, she officially rejoined Fleetwood Mac, reuniting the band's classic lineup for the first time in over a decade. Beyond her work with Fleetwood Mac, Christine built a respected solo career as well. Her 1984 self-titled solo album featured contributions from major musicians, including guitar work from Eric Clapton and vocal contributions from Steve Winwood, and produced the hit single Got a Hold on Me, which reached the American Top 10. Throughout her career, she received numerous honors, including induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as part of Fleetwood Mac in 1998, the Brit Award for Outstanding Contribution to Music, the Ivor Novello Award for Lifetime Achievement, an honorary doctorate in music, and a Grammy Award for Album of the Year for Rumours. When news of her death broke, the reaction from her former bandmates reflected just how central she had been to the band's identity. Stevie Nicks revealed publicly that she had not even known how seriously ill Christine was, and that she had been prepared to fly to London to be by her side, only to be told by the family that time had already run out. Nicks later wrote an emotional tribute describing Christine as her best friend in the world, closing her message with a line about seeing her on the other side. Mick Fleetwood spoke at her memorial service in Malibu in January 2023, describing the scale of the loss as almost impossible to put into words, and remembering her as someone who valued the music and the people around her far more than fame itself. Lindsey Buckingham described her as a musical partner, a friend, and a sister. In the aftermath, both Fleetwood and Nicks suggested that Fleetwood Mac could not continue without her, describing her as the connective thread that had held the band together for 50 years. What made her death resonate so widely wasn't only the loss of a gifted songwriter, but the revelation that she had spent her final months quietly facing serious cascading health problems, including a cancer that even her own doctors could never fully trace to its source. The woman who had spent decades writing some of popular music's warmest, most hopeful songs had, in the end, kept the true scope of her suffering almost entirely to herself, private in death, just as she had always been in life.